For the time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
Harry had endured public criticism, fractured relationships, and years of distance from the institution he once called home. But nothing prepared him for the message that arrived without warning. His access to one of the royal family's most private estates had been withdrawn, and the authorization had come directly from William. No public announcement. No ceremonial confrontation. Just a quiet decision that transformed an old family wound into something far more permanent. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry stared at the message as if one sentence might change if he read it again. It did not. The private estate had always meant more than land. For generations, properties had served as secluded retreats where senior royals could gather beyond official ceremonies. That privacy mattered because it created a space where family identity existed, apart from royal performance. Even after stepping away from active duties, Harry had viewed access as a thread connecting him to that private world. William had now cut that thread. The prince had secretly authorized the removal of Harry's standing permission to enter and stay at the estate, unless personally invited and approved in advance. Standing permission simply meant he had once been able to visit without seeking fresh authorization every time. Now that informal access was gone, Harry set his phone down, walked away, then returned. His eyes fixed on the line. "William did this?" he asked quietly, disbelief turning sharper. Harry felt the injury before anger arrived. Losing access to property was one thing. Losing the assumption that he still belonged there was something else. The Duke understood the decision instantly. William had drawn a line between being family by blood and being trusted inside the family's most protected spaces. Worse, the restriction had already taken effect before Harry was informed. His name had been removed from the internal access list, making the move deliberate, completed, and impossible to dismiss as an empty threat. Charles entered the question immediately. Harry demanded to know whether the king had approved it. The answer was measured. His father knew discussions were happening, but William had personally finalized the restriction. That distinction changed everything. Harry's shock hardened into restrained fury. He refused to answer through an aide. He wanted his brother directly, because this was no longer about procedure. William, however, was already prepared. And as Harry's disbelief hardened into something more painful, the real question became unavoidable. What had happened between the two brothers for William to decide that even the family's most private sanctuary was no longer a place Harry could freely enter? Long before palace gates became symbols of division, William and Harry had crossed them together. They shared childhood grief, royal expectations, private jokes, and the burden of growing up beneath relentless public attention. That history made the new restriction far more devastating. William was not simply limiting a former working royal. He was placing a boundary around his own brother, and Harry understood that whatever remained between them was now being measured not through affection, but through trust. Harry could not separate the estate from memory. He remembered arriving there without permission requests, without wondering whether his presence needed to be justified. Those private spaces had once meant safety because they stood apart from official duty. A working royal is a family member carrying out public responsibilities on behalf of the crown, and Harry had left that role years earlier. Yet, in his mind, leaving duty had never meant surrendering every connection to home. William carried a different burden. The prince had spent years moving closer to the responsibilities of an heir, the person expected to succeed the monarch and protect the institution's continuity. To him, royal spaces were not sentimental refuges. They were places where children could relax, family tensions could be discussed, and security arrangements could remain protected from public exposure. Harry saw belonging. William saw responsibility. That difference had become impossible to ignore. Catherine understood the collision before either brother admitted. She sat beside William before he approved the restriction and watched him hold the pen above the authorization. He told her that doing this to Harry felt brutal. She did not interrupt. William then admitted that leaving the boundary undefined felt worse, because future gatherings would carry uncertainty. Catherine finally asked whether he was acting as a future king or as a hurt brother. William paused. "I don't know if I can separate them anymore," he said. The silence after that answer mattered. Catherine reached across the table and placed her hand over his. William signed. Then he left the pen resting on the page and stared at what he had done. No triumph followed. No relief came. He had gained control over a problem and, at the same moment, deepened the fracture with Harry. Harry's anger sharpened when he learned one detail. The restriction was not a universal rule covering every extended relative. It had been built around his circumstances. That meant this was personal. He began tracing backward through recent months, replaying conversations he had dismissed as tension. One private weekend suddenly stood out, because the restriction had not appeared from nowhere, and buried behind William's decision was one private encounter Harry never realized had become the point of no return. Every family rupture has a moment that looks ordinary, until history gives it meaning. For William and Harry, that moment came during a private royal weekend months earlier. There were no cameras, no speeches, and no dramatic public argument. Yet one tense conversation inside the estate transformed William's unease into determination. Harry left believing the disagreement had ended. William remained behind, convinced that something fundamental had broken, and from that evening onward, unrestricted access was living on borrowed time. Harry had arrived for the weekend under carefully agreed conditions. The visit was meant to preserve family contact without reopening every argument surrounding his distance from royal life. William had accepted that balance because the private estate still carried emotional meaning for both brothers. A family-only area meant exactly that. A protected part of the property, reserved for relatives and approved household members, away from outside guests and formal business. For Harry, the rule felt increasingly narrow. For William, it was the line holding everything together. The tension broke when Harry asked to bring an outside associate into that restricted space. William refused immediately. Harry pushed back, asking why someone he trusted was being treated as a threat. The prince did not raise his voice, but his answer landed hard. He reminded his brother that the visit had been approved on clear terms, and that changing those terms after arrival was precisely the kind of pressure he feared. Harry heard suspicion. William heard a boundary being tested. Harry's frustration deepened into humiliation. He told William that being treated like a security concern inside places they had known since childhood proved the family no longer separated disagreement from betrayal. William's expression hardened. He answered that childhood memories could not be used as permanent permission, and trust meant respecting a refusal without turning it into another accusation. The more quietly he spoke, the heavier the moment became. Harry moved toward the door, expecting the argument to end there. William stayed where he was. "I cannot keep pretending nothing has changed," he said. Harry stopped, but he did not turn back. The prince added that trust had consequences. Then the door closed between them, without either brother saying goodbye. William acted soon after. He privately asked a senior aide to begin a full review of discretionary estate access, meaning informal permission granted at royal discretion rather than guaranteed entry. The request remained confidential. Harry left believing the dispute had ended, unaware that the process leading to his exclusion had already begun. Months later, that same unfinished conversation would resume, but this time there would be no aides, no paperwork, and nowhere for either brother to hide from what the decision truly meant. When Harry finally stood opposite William, the estate restriction was no longer an administrative decision. It became personal in the most painful way possible. Years of resentment suddenly condensed into one question. How could one brother decide that the other no longer belonged inside a place tied to their childhood? William did not retreat, Harry did not soften, and for several brutal minutes, neither man spoke as a prince. They spoke as brothers. Harry entered the private meeting carrying more anger than he intended to show. No aides sat nearby, no ceremonial duties softened the exchange, and no official statement stood between them. He wanted two answers: why the decision had been hidden, and why William believed he had the right to redefine his place inside the family. The prince answered carefully at first. Harry was not permanently banned. Automatic access had been removed. Future visits could still happen through a direct invitation and agreed security arrangements, meaning entry would be planned rather than assumed. Harry rejected the distinction immediately. He told William that needing permission to enter a place woven through their childhood made him a guest inside his own history. His voice tightened. To him, this was punishment dressed as procedure. William held his restraint for only a moment longer. He said years of damaged confidence could not be repaired, while every boundary was treated as cruelty. Affection, he insisted, did not erase consequences. Harry pushed his chair backward and stood. "So you decided I don't belong?" he asked. William remained seated for a beat, then rose slowly. "I decided trust cannot be assumed anymore." The words changed the room. Harry demanded to know whether Charles had ordered the restriction. William looked directly at him and answered that the responsibility was his. The king had not been used as cover, and neither palace officials nor security advisors would be blamed for what he had chosen. William then gave him the detail that hurt most. He had deliberately kept the access review confidential because he believed advance warning would turn a private family decision into another public fight before it could even take effect. Harry heard that as proof his brother no longer trusted him with disagreement itself. William saw it as proof of why the boundary had become necessary. Harry left furious, but the anger was no longer simple. His brother had not hidden behind anyone. He had owned the decision completely, and that ownership forced Harry to confront a deeper royal reality. But beneath the brother's anger lay an uncomfortable reality Harry had not fully considered. William's decision carried weight because the balance of power inside the monarchy had already begun shifting. Royal power rarely announces itself with raised voices. Sometimes it appears through a signature, a security instruction, or a quiet change to a list no member of the public ever sees. Harry's exclusion exposed that reality with brutal clarity. William was no longer simply the older brother who once walked beside him. He had become the man increasingly trusted to protect the monarchy's private boundaries, and that responsibility gave his judgment consequences Harry could no longer ignore. Charles felt the weight of that authority before he said a word. He sat alone with the restriction, removed his glasses, and read the key lines again. Private royal properties did not operate like public engagements, where attendance could be announced and arranged through schedules. Family residences and secluded retreats depended on permission, security approval, invitations, and household authority. That distinction mattered because access carried intimacy with it. Whoever entered those spaces could come close to private conversations, family routines, and children shielded from public life. William understood that responsibility had changed him. The prince's growing role meant his judgment increasingly mattered where privacy, security, and continuity were concerned, especially whenever Catherine and their children were present. He did not describe Harry as a threat when he finally sat opposite Charles. Instead, he said the decision hurt because his brother was still family. But family, he argued, could not mean permanent access without rebuilt trust. Charles listened without interrupting, caught between a father's instinct to prevent another rupture and a monarch's duty to accept boundaries once they had been judged necessary. Charles closed the file and left one hand resting on the cover. William waited. The king finally looked across at him. "You understand what this will cost?" The future king answered with a single word. "Yes." Charles did not overturn the restriction. His silence afterward carried its own verdict. His elder son had acted within the responsibility now being placed upon him, and reversing the decision simply to ease immediate pain would weaken the boundary before it had even been tested. Harry learned that reality quickly. An emotional appeal to his father could not simply restore his former access overnight. The restriction had been deliberately structured through household and security procedures, making it more than one brother's spoken command. Harry's anger remained, but his focus began to change. If he could no longer assume entry, then every future family gathering would force the same painful question: would he be invited? Or would life inside those private gates continue without him? And that cost became real almost immediately, when a family gathering approached and Harry discovered that the new boundary was not symbolic. It was already changing where he stood. The first true consequence did not arrive through another confrontation. It arrived through silence. A family gathering was scheduled at the private estate, the kind of occasion Harry once would have understood instinctively as part of his world. This time, no invitation appeared. No room was prepared. No security coordination began. And as the date approached, Harry confronted the new reality William's decision had created. Exclusion did not need to be announced to hurt. Harry learned about the gathering through family communication, not palace correspondence. That difference cut deeply. The weekend was deliberately informal, bringing together Charles, William, Catherine, their children, and several close relatives, away from public ceremony. A private family weekend meant exactly that. Time arranged for relatives beyond official duties, speeches, or scheduled appearances. Before the restriction, Harry might have expected his attendance to be discussed naturally. Now the new rule demanded a direct invitation. None came. Harry tried to tell himself the silence was practical. Then the date arrived. The absence became real. He understood that rooms were being filled, conversations were unfolding, and family life was continuing without him. This was no longer about whether his name appeared on an access list. It was about being left outside a moment that once would have felt instinctively his. Charles noticed the empty place as well. During a quiet moment, he asked William whether Harry had been invited. The prince answered simply that he had not, because nothing had changed since their confrontation. The king did not challenge him, but the question lingered. Catherine later raised the harder concern in private. She asked whether a boundary created for protection could become permanent estrangement if nobody ever tested a way back. William admitted the fear had been following him, but he also knew that reversing the restriction, merely because the first consequence felt painful, would make the entire decision meaningless. Harry, meanwhile, opened a message to his brother and began typing. Anger poured onto the screen. He accused William of shutting him out, humiliating him, and turning family into permission. Harry stopped. He deleted every word. Then he wrote only, "Is there actually a way back from this?" Across the country, William read the sentence twice and placed his phone face down. For the first time since imposing the restriction, he had no immediate answer. The message changed the conflict, because Harry was no longer demanding access. He was asking whether trust could survive. That single question accomplished what anger had failed to do. It forced William to decide whether he wanted merely to close a door, or whether he was willing to tell his brother what would ever allow it to open again. The decisive moment came without courtiers, security briefings, advisors, or royal titles. William and Harry met privately again, but the atmosphere had changed. Harry was no longer demanding immediate restoration. William was no longer defending himself line by line. Between them sat the uncomfortable truth that neither could return to the relationship they once had. The question was whether something different could survive in its place. And for the first time, both brothers were willing to speak about conditions rather than accusations. Harry arrived carrying less anger, but more honesty. His earlier message had changed the purpose of the meeting because he was no longer asking William to erase the restriction. He wanted to know whether trust could ever be rebuilt. Neither brother brought an aide. No household official sat nearby to translate emotion into procedure. William made one point clear early. Automatic access would not return immediately. The estate would remain invitation only for Harry, with security and privacy conditions agreed in advance. Harry listened, then admitted what had hurt most. It was not simply the loss of access. It was discovering after the fact that William had already acted. He told his brother that difficult limits might have been easier to accept if he had been trusted enough to hear them directly. The prince did not argue with that pain. He acknowledged the secrecy had caused damage, but explained that he had feared another confrontation would stop any boundary from being created at all. William then said something more personal. He no longer knew how to disagree with Harry without expecting the disagreement itself to grow into something larger. That fear, he admitted, had shaped more of his decisions than he wanted to accept. Harry did not interrupt. For once, neither man tried to win. The path forward was narrow, but real. William said personal invitations could return. Access would be deliberate rather than automatic, and trust would have to grow through private contact that remained private. Harry did not smile. He simply said he wanted a relationship with his family more than he wanted unrestricted entry to an estate. William moved toward the door when the conversation ended, but Harry stopped him. "I needed to know you weren't trying to erase me." The future king paused. "I'm trying to know where the boundaries are." No embrace followed. No grand reconciliation came. Yet both brothers left understanding the difference between exclusion and distance. Inside the room, the conflict had finally cooled, but beyond those walls, the moment the restriction became public, the private pain of two brothers was transformed into a national argument about loyalty, punishment, and belonging. For weeks, the decision had existed behind closed doors. Then one morning, it escaped into public view. Suddenly, a private boundary between two brothers became front-page judgment material. Some saw William protecting the monarchy. Others saw Harry being pushed further away from the only family world he had ever known. Yet one specific public moment captured the story more powerfully than argument. A single photograph outside the estate gates turned an invisible restriction into something millions could instantly understand. Harry watched the coverage with growing frustration. Broadcasters emphasized that he had not been permanently banned, but that he could no longer enter or stay at the private estate without explicit approval. That distinction mattered because automatic access meant entry without a fresh invitation each time, while the new arrangement placed every future visit under direct permission. Palace communications stressed privacy, security, and changed family circumstances. But none of that language could compete with the emotional simplicity of one phrase: locked out. William felt the pressure from the opposite direction. Some commentators described the restriction as responsible boundary setting. Others called it unnecessarily harsh. Catherine noticed that he listened without reacting as sharply as he might have before. The prince was still carrying the weight of criticism, but something had changed. He and Harry had already spoken privately. He no longer needed the public to validate the decision in order to defend it. Then the image appeared. A major morning newspaper placed a photograph of the closed estate gates across its front page beneath the stark headline, "Brother at the Gate." Television programs repeated the image throughout the day. The gates became more than an entrance. They became a symbol of everything the brothers had lost: easy access, automatic trust, and the belief that family history could protect them from consequence. Harry finally turned off the television. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd had gathered near the barriers, while broadcasters debated whether the decision represented protection or rejection. He could have answered publicly. He could have attacked William and reclaimed control of the story. Instead, he reached for his phone. Harry typed 4 words: "I'm not responding publicly." William read the message and answered, "Neither am I." That exchange mattered more than the headlines. Neither brother allowed public pressure to destroy the private understanding they had finally reached. The gate remained controlled, but their relationship was no longer being measured only by whether it opened automatically. And with both brothers refusing to turn their private agreement into another public war, the final meaning of William's decision became clearer than the headlines suggested. In the end, Harry did not regain the life he once had, and William did not withdraw the boundary he had imposed. That is what made the episode so painful, but also so revealing. There was no cinematic reunion that erased years of mistrust. There was something quieter, and perhaps more significant. Both men finally stopped pretending the past could simply be restored. The estate remained protected. Harry remained family. And the difference between those two truths became the defining lesson of their fractured brotherhood. Harry finally accepted what the restriction meant. His birth into the royal family did not guarantee permanent access to every private space surrounding it, especially after his position outside the working inner circle had changed. Automatic access, the ability to enter without a fresh invitation or advance approval, was gone. The realization hurt because it forced him to separate family identity from royal privilege. Yet that same separation gave him something unexpected: a chance to judge his relationships by personal trust rather than gates, rooms, and inherited access. William faced an equally difficult truth. The prince understood that protecting the monarchy could not mean treating Harry as emotionally disposable. He kept the restriction in place, but he also refused to turn it into complete severance. Controlled trust became the compromise. Personal invitations could still happen. Private contact could continue. The boundary remained firm, but it no longer carried the message that his brother had been erased. Charles accepted that balance because it removed the impossible pressure to choose completely between his sons. The king could recognize William's responsibility without pretending Harry no longer belonged to the family. Catherine saw the same shift. She understood that the relationship was still damaged, but damage was different from destruction. For the first time, the conflict had limits. William eventually told Harry during another private exchange that future invitations would come when the circumstances were right. Harry did not ask when. He did not demand a date, an apology, or immediate restoration. He simply nodded. Neither brother mistook the moment for reconciliation, but neither walked away believing the relationship was finished. The meaning was final. The old brotherhood, built on childhood, automatic loyalty, and shared royal identity, was over. What survived was narrower, more cautious, and far less romantic, but it was real. The gate remained closed unless William chose to open it, but for the first time in years, Harry understood that the real question was no longer whether he could enter a royal estate. It was whether the two brothers could build a relationship that no longer depended on one. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.